Hello, good evening. Welcome to Tiski Sam. My name's Bastani. We're trying at the second time of asking. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. This evening I'm joined by the enigmatic, the one and only Michael Walker at Michael JS Walker. How you doing, Michael?
I'm very well. Feels very different sitting on this side of the table, I have to say.
How so?
I just feel like I'm under loads more pressure. All the camera, it feels like I'm center stage. I can't just pretend. I can't lean back and let the conversation go on without me. I can't believe I put people through this week on week. Well, brave souls come in here to be interrogated by me. Now it's me.
There are people that often comment on our report and how it's a bit aggressive, which I think is obviously unfair.
Someone told me once you should take me to an employment tribunal.
Yeah, but then other people say it's the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's good. I think a little bit of tension, a little bit of disagreement works.
We agree on the big stuff. But who doesn't these days? We'll talk about it shortly, but there was a Keir Starmer article in The Guardian. I thought that could have been written by David Cameron in 2005. And you want to talk maybe about the Labour list poll?
The new Labour list poll, I think, regardless of who you're backing in this election, this makes it much more exciting. It seemed like Keir Starmer was running away in the Labour leadership race. A new poll done by Labour List and Survation, weighted sample, of Labour List readers. So, we'll have to look into more detail about what the actual poll and what the sample means, but it shows Becky Long-Bailey winning in the second round, 51 to 49 for Keir Starmer. So the race is now wide open.
Is it Labour List readers?
It's Labour List it's Labour List readers, because that's where they've got,
that is a dodgy sample then, isn't it?
Well, what they say is it's Labour List readers, but they've weighted it to approximate what the Labour Party membership looks like. I don't know, because for example, if they weighted it to how did you vote in 2016, then presumably it can get quite a nice sort of sense of the political spread of Labour Party members.
But then so many new people have joined in the last month. You'll have so many people join as registered supporters. But still, it's going to be competitive.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't think, if anything, this will mean that Starmer should be, ramping up his Facebook advertising campaign or whatever, because it doesn't seem like any of the candidates have been doing a huge drive. The cut-off date for joining the Labour Party and getting a vote is the 20th of January, which is presumably, is that next Monday?
Looks like it, yeah.
Yeah. Or Sunday even, actually. Yeah, it's Sunday. So you'd have thought you'd have a huge, upswell of mobilising from all the candidates, but especially the more centrist, non-momentum candidates, because they want to change the electorate in one way or another. And as far as I can tell, that's not really happening. There doesn't seem to be huge popular excitement about any of the non-left candidates in this. Everyone was assuming that Starmer would run away with it, but there's no, Starmerism or Starmer mania, Keir mania, I suppose it would be called. That hasn't yet emerged.
It's yet to materialise. But before we talk about the trials and tribulations of the Labour Party, we're going to talk about the Dem debate last night. It was, I believe, the 7th debate. Is that right?
Yeah, they have loads.
They have so many debates.
This was the final debate before the Iowa caucus,
which is next month.
So significant. The Iowa, it's early February. I'm not sure exactly the date.
So it's like 2 or 3 weeks.
It's in about three weeks' time. February the 3rd.
February the 3rd.
Fox came in there with the.
This is why we need
proper details.
This is why we need Foxcam, because
we've got the vague idea. We think it's kind of at the beginning of February. Yeah, we'll get the Foxcam up soon.
And there's only 6 candidates left. Andrew Yang, the Yang gang, is gone.
Well, there's not 6 candidates. There's 6 candidates that qualified for the debate, so it's not that everyone else has dropped out.
But in this particular debate, no Kamala Harris as well.
She has dropped out.
She has dropped out.
I think Andrew Yang is still in it. He just didn't qualify for that debate.
How so?
I don't know what the rules were for that particular one, but how it's worked up to now in general is that to get into the debate, you have to prove that you have raised X number of dollars in X number of states. So it was supposed to encourage grassroots organising and grassroots fundraising. That was definitely how the first bunch were organised.
It's weird how Amy Klobuchar made it and Andrew Yang didn't, because I would have thought they're more or less
she's
similar candidates in terms of
she's
profile,
polling higher nationally.
Right.
So that will go to her advantage. Also she might have a more professional operation, because throughout this campaign, even though Klobuchar is still on 6%, I don't think she's ever gone above single digits. There have constantly been people saying she is the dark horse of this race, because they say everyone else has got these. She's the pitch perfect, molded to beat Trump because she's a sort of strong centrist woman from the Midwest. That doesn't seem to have taken off with the Democratic base, but there is a certain sort of pundit class who thinks that she has to stay in this race and you should put money on her.
The centrist Beltway / Westminster pundits called it wrong again.
Well,
she still might win.
Yeah, maybe they'll go back and find this clip and, put some music to it and show how wrong we were in, well, I suppose it'll be, is it around next June we find out the results of the primaries?
Yeah. Let's look at some polls. Because, of course, the main candidate that we're interested in on the left is Bernie Sanders. Maybe we can just get this up. This is a tracker of basically Bernie Sanders' results or the sort of preference amongst registered Democrats over the last 8-9 months here. And as you can see, Bernie was doing pretty well last summer. And then he suffered a bit of a dip, but now he's coming back strong. 19%. That's amongst registered Democrats most recently. And then there's a pretty interesting article in Newsweek. We can pull this up. Talking about precisely this. Very interesting article in Newsweek, actually. And it says, compilations of January and end-of-year polls conducted among general election and Democratic primary voters show Sanders has jumped about 5 percentage points since early December, which wasn't that long ago, right? It's a month ago. As Real Clear Politics compilation of polls shows, Sanders started out in early 2019 as the clear second-place candidate behind Biden before briefly plunging below Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts and Kamala Harris of California. As we just said, Harris has since dropped out. Sanders has climbed more than 5 percentage points and Warren has stagnated from 1 month ago. Despite a morning consult poll released Tuesday showing Biden as the clear favourite in a head-to-head matchup with Trump, it is Sanders who has spiked up to the top of several recent voter surveys. That same poll also shows Sanders defeating Trump and corroborates Emerson and CNN polls. So this is multiple polls showing that the Vermont Senator, Sanders, wins by the widest of margins of victory in any hypothetical general election matchup against Trump. So not only is Bernie Sanders looking competitive against his contenders for the Democratic nomination, he's looking like the real deal, the most electable candidate when it comes to fighting Trump. What do you think's going on?
Oh, well, in terms of the boost in the polls, I mean, it looked for a while like Elizabeth Warren was supposed to be, the more electable left-wing candidate. She had momentum behind her. People were talking about Bernie Sanders being too old. He had a heart attack. I mean, I suppose the biggest surprise in this race was it looked like the moment when Bernie Sanders was out was when he had a heart attack. He's running for president.
It's quite a big deal.
But the comeback from that was incredible. They mounted a huge, they called it the comeback, a huge rally in New York. That was when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came out and backed him. So did Ilhan Omar and the rest of the squad. I suppose apart from Ayanna Pressley, who backed Elizabeth Warren. But in any case, he came back fighting. He looks way more, astute and with it intellectually than Joe Biden, who's often standing next to him on the stage. So I think that's a helpful comparison for him. But ultimately, I think people are waking up to the fact that Bernie Sanders looks like the most plausible candidate to take on and defeat Donald Trump. I suppose Elizabeth Warren, she's run a decent campaign, but there was a certain degree of flip-flopping around Medicare for All, which has potentially, upset the Democratic base, but also suggested that there might be vulnerabilities there when she goes up against, well, if she were to go up against Donald Trump, whereas the consistency of Bernie Sanders and the message discipline of Bernie Sanders means he's exactly, it's difficult to be objective about this, but, you can see how sitting back, not as a leftist, plausibly, he is the person who can cut through, who can punch through the style of politics that Donald Trump operates with.
Well, we haven't put this in the show notes, but actually there are a few articles out there saying that Donald Trump is increasingly obsessed with Bernie Sanders' genre of politics and how well he's polling. And he just finds it quite interesting. There's an article in the Daily Beast that talks about this. And of course, he made a tweet a few days ago about Bernie Sanders.
What did it say, sir?
I can't remember. And Bernie Sanders retweeted it and he said, yeah, I'm going to beat you, kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember the retweet. I can't remember what was in
so
the
there's
original
kind of
one.
like, I think, there's a general recognition that what Sanders is doing poses a significant threat to Trump. And that's a reasonable estimation because, of course, Trump's path to the White House, as predicted by Michael Moore, ahead of the 2016 presidential race, was through former Rust Belt states. And look at it, the hard and fast facts are what candidate is the most likely to win those back, and yeah.
And it's not just the Rust Belt.
He's well placed.
Just before we went live, a poll came out from Florida Atlantic University. Now, I don't know enough about American pollsters to know which is the polling company we should trust, but this is doing head-to-heads in Florida. And in Florida, it's got, if you're doing hypothetical head-to-heads against Donald Trump, in Florida, Sanders is on 53 against Donald Trump's 47. So it's not just that Sanders can win in the Rust Belt states, in the Midwest. It looks like he's got the best odds against Trump everywhere. Biden, to complete
they'd have to win in Florida to stand a chance.
To complete the poll, Biden's on 51, Trump's on 49, all in Florida. Warren's on 51, Trump's on 49 in Florida, and Buttigieg and Trump are both on 50%. So they, other than Buttigieg, they all beat Trump, but Sanders by the most comfortable margin.
Let's go to a great article actually in Jacobin magazine, our friends over at Jacobin, based in New York. I thought it was a really good summing up of where we are right now. Provocative title: the media is waking up to a possible Bernie victory. Get ready for the backlash. Of course, they're waking up to the possibility of that because these polls are suggesting he has a real shot. This is not insurgency. This is not like he kept on saying in 2016. He kept on saying, we have the momentum. I mean, he has momentum, but actually increasingly he looks like the bookie's favourite to win the nomination. So this is in Jacobin. Early this week, polling fresh out of New Hampshire and Iowa, the first two places which are going to be up for grabs, showed him respectively leading and statistically tied for first. And unless something dramatically changes in the next few weeks, Sanders seems well placed to perform well in both and ride the momentum into Nevada and South Carolina, the states that come afterwards. Adding to this were fundraising numbers from the final quarter of 2019 that had Sanders out fundraising billionaire-backed candidates like Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden by a considerable margin, their cornering of the critical wine cave demographic notwithstanding. According to a recent CNN SSRS poll, he also has the highest favourability rating for any Democrat in the 2020 field. Now, here's the nub of the article, because, of course, it talks about a backlash from the media. Though Sanders and his campaign are doubtless enjoying this respite from the usual hostilities, he's not really had the kind of mauling from the media we'd associate with Jeremy Corbyn in this country, for instance. More of that in a second. No one who supports Bernie should be under any illusions about what is almost certainly going to happen the moment he racks up even a single primary or caucus victory. If the corporate media and Washington political elite have mostly dismissed or ignored Sanders for the last 12 months, the genuine prospect of a socialist iconoclast who talks about mass movements and political revolutions securing the presidential nomination of a major party is bound to provoke something louder and potentially uglier than anything we've ever seen before. So what do you think of that? Do you think Sanders is now going to be subjected to the same avalanche of criticism that Jeremy Corbyn was, or do you think that won't happen? And if it does happen, do you think he'll be better at dealing with it?
I mean, I think it will, clearly. The American media, I mean, there are structural differences between the American media and here. They don't necessarily have, such a, I suppose, disgraceful print press as we do. And especially, I suppose, because they have these very much sort of like divergent worlds of television, whilst Fox, if Bernie gets through to the final round, Fox will, be ripping him to shreds. I don't know if CNN will sort of play it kind of fair because they know that they've spent the last 4 years sort of portraying themselves and, building up their identity as never Trumpers. So if they were to get to a presidential election and then allow Trump to get re-elected, that, puts their brand really in danger. Yeah. And in terms of, the fear that the American elites are going to have, there'll be lots of limits to Bernie Sanders' power, especially when it comes to the economy because Congress controls so much. But you could have said the same thing about Jeremy Corbyn here because you had right-wingers on the PLP. So either Bernie Sanders winning in America, Corbyn winning in Britain would both be very significant. Neither would have managed to, do the kind of revolution that would seriously, undermine liberal institutions like the Guardian and the CNN, but they still try to destroy Corbyn, so they'll probably do the same there. But the difference is, and I think this is a serious distance, it's untested, and people are right to say that Corbyn had it tougher than Bernie so far because people saw him as closer to power, and also he was leading a parliamentary party, so he had a bunch of backbenchers who were sniping at him, which the presidential system doesn't, make quite as big a structural problem. But I think the big differences are their ability to respond to this, right? And I think the differences in their ability to respond to this and why it's going to be very hard for the American media to destroy Bernie Sanders in the way that the British media destroyed Jeremy Corbyn is firstly, because Sanders' past actually doesn't have that much in it which Americans will find objectionable. And you can see this through the desperation of what the American press is trying to dig up and why none of their attacks are really landing. We'll look at those in a moment. And second, Sanders, when any critique comes or even when a question comes that he doesn't think is going to be, is not terrain which is going to win him support in those key states, he changes the subject with message discipline, which, unfortunately, for all his, for all his pluses, message discipline was never Corbyn's strongest point. So to demonstrate, these 2 points, Sanders' past being less of a burden than Corbyn's was, and his message discipline, we got some evidence. So let's go to video 1. Oh, actually, no, we won't go to the video first. So this is an example of the trouble the liberal media in the United States is having in tarnishing Bernie Sanders because of his past. So we're going to get up a tweet from a journalist from CNN. And so it says, new, Bernie Sanders on House floor in 1998. Saddam Hussein is a brutal dictator who should be overthrown, and his ability to make weapons of destruction must be eliminated. One of many times he backed regime change in Iraq and elsewhere. So I suppose one thing that's interesting here is that CNN, attacking Bernie Sanders from the left, which is, showing how... NBC, sorry.
Yeah.
NBC is attacking him from the left, showing how much of his, his actual politics they think is in line with... that they can't attack him for his actual politics, so they try and attack him for hypocrisy, because they think that his politics are fairly in line with the American people. But even this attack on him in terms of hypocrisy, because he's standing as the anti-war candidate, just falls. If you look at the actual video, it is nothing of the sort. So let's look at the first video from Bernie Sanders in 1998.
Let me express my serious concerns about the current military action ordered by the president. I am concerned that this action took place with no discussion in the United States Congress, despite the fact that the Constitution makes it very clear that it is this body which declares war. I am concerned that while we are ostensibly supporting a United Nations resolution, the UN did not vote for this attack, does not support this attack, and that country after country throughout the world are condemning this attack. This is important because if the United States is to have credibility in the future in terms of condemning aggression, how do we go forward when countries say, hey, we felt aggrieved, we wanted to do it, that's what you did, you didn't come to the United Nations. This article of war, this act of aggression, is not supported by the Vatican. Let me quote from the Vatican. Quote, the Holy See agrees fully with the Secretary General of the UN that today is a sad day for the United Nations and for the world. The Holy See hopes that this aggression will end as soon as possible and that international order is restored. Mr. Speaker, Saddam Hussein is a brutal dictator who should be overthrown, and his ability to make weapons of destruction must be eliminated. I have serious doubts, however, whether the action that we are taking today will take us one step forward in that direction.
So I suppose, the reason I showed that clip, two things it proves, right? Maybe proves is a bit strong, but two things it demonstrates is that one, the liberal media are really struggling to find things to attack this guy with. That was the weakest story. They're saying this was another example of Bernie Sanders arguing for regime change in Iraq. He was explicitly, if you watch the 2-minute video, giving a speech in Congress or the Senate, I don't know which one he was in at that point, about
it's a state Senate,
in opposition to the Iraq war. and so it's such a weak attack line. But the other thing, which I think is probably more significant, is that, rightly or wrongly, what you see from that speech is that Bernie Sanders has consistently been anti-war, but he's also been, pro-USA. So he's never really found himself, and I'm saying this not in terms of this makes him a better person than Corbyn, but it makes him, it's going to be easier for him as a politician. He's never really defended America's enemies. He has always said that it's in the best interest of the United States not to go into this war. And yes, also we should have solidarity with people in other countries. But he's always been clear, that where he stands is he is an American politician. And he's pro-USA, basically. And that was something that didn't really come up in Jeremy Corbyn's past. So people saw Jeremy Corbyn as always siding with Britain's enemies, rightly or wrongly. And I think they're going to really struggle to pin that on Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I think also the way the way he phrases that right off the sort of cuff, he says, we need to get rid of Saddam Hussein, which is what the NBC guy is quoting. He's creating weapons of mass destruction, which in the early 90s they were. Chemical weapons were being built there, etc. We need to get rid of him. But we need to do it in a way which is congruent with international law, multilateral institutions. And the thing is, with Labour, with Jeremy Corbyn, with John McDonnell, it would always have started with that end bit. We need international law. And they sort of skirt around the big decisive lines, which those are the rules of politics. We don't necessarily choose them, but that's what we have to deal with. And like I say, what Sanders says there, I think, is like middle America totally gets that. He's saying big, bold claims very clearly. Okay, good. So you agree that Saddam's a bad guy, but we should ideally abide by international law, because if we don't, then people like Russia in the future will follow suit, which is precisely what happened, right? For instance, the US and the EU unilaterally recognized the sovereignty of Kosovo. What do the Russians do? They go occupy Crimea, and they say, well, what's the difference? That's a good question. So I couldn't agree more. I think it's a very, 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 very different politician you're facing with Bernie Sanders.
So that was the argument about why he's different from Corbyn in terms of what his politics have been and what they can dig up from his past. Also, I think a big difference between Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn is Sanders' ability to pivot away from questions which he doesn't think are going to be helpful to his re-election. So this is a clip. It's from a while ago, but I always return to it just because I think it is the best example or the most impressive example of message discipline I've seen from a politician. We need a little moment before we go to that? No? Great.
On the issue of Representative Ocasio-Cortez, she has a chief of staff, pretty disruptive. You've heard about Saikat Chakrabarti. He has said Democrat leaders in the House have, quote, enabled a racist system. Should that kind of critique be tolerated?
Well, look, you're getting into inside the Beltway.
I am a reporter.
Yeah, I know, but if you're a reporter, and the answer is no. Do I think Nancy Pelosi is a racist? Of course not. But this is what I do think, and let's get to what really is going on. What is going on in America today? We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. In the last 30 years, we have seen an explosion in technology and productivity. All right? And yet today, the average American worker is earning in real inflation accounted for dollars, not one penny more than he or she earned 45 years ago. Over the last 30 years, this is quite unbelievable. Over the last 30 years, the top 1% has seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth. Anyone here know what the bottom 50% has seen? Decline in their wealth by $900 billion. 3 people, including the guy who owns the Washington Post, 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America. All right? You have a corporate elite where the fossil fuel industry today makes billions of dollars a year in profits while they are destroying this planet. Top 10 drug companies made $69 billion in profit last year. Average American cannot afford to buy the medicine they need because we are charged by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We are the only major country in the world not to provide health care to all people as a right. Our younger generation, everything being equal, will have a lower standard of living than their parents. Those are the reasons why Trump gets...
It's just brilliant, wasn't it?
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, one, he's recognized so quickly that you are not going to win the general election based on a debate about whether or not Nancy Pelosi is racist. So the background to that was when there was a bit of a flame war on Twitter between some of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's staff and Nancy Pelosi. To be honest, I can't even remember the details, but that's
Ilhan Omar, right? Because she rebuked Omar for all about the Benjamin tweet.
I think it was about the squad in general, because she said the squad were right. They haven't been in Congress as long as me. They've just got a lot of Twitter followers, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're politically important as I am. So it wasn't great. But Bernie Sanders is like, am I going to win people round by having this particular debate? No. And the other thing he's good at doing, which Corbyn always struggled with, is if he wants to pivot, he gets permission to pivot by answering the question. So he says, is Nancy Pelosi? No, I'm here to talk about wealth inequality. Whereas if he'd said, I don't want to answer that question, I want to talk about wealth inequality, then a good interviewer would push him, as I'm sure that interviewer would have done. But he gets permission to move on because he says a simple yes, no answer. And I mean, he's on the stage of the Washington Post, and he sort of, thinks to bring into his narrative about, the top wealthiest people in America, et cetera, including the owner of the Washington Post. And it just shows a political dexterity, which is, bar to none.
It's phenomenal, actually. For a guy that age, and somebody put it in the comments when it was up, they said, wow, I love how Bernie was, the previous clip, I love how Bernie was old in 1990. But I guess he's been doing it for a long time, but then so had Jeremy Corbyn. It's interesting. I wonder where the refined kind of nature of the rhetorical response obviously comes very naturally to him. Where do you think that's coming from? Is that coming from his experience in state legislatures, or is it a different kind of media environment, or what?
Well, I mean, he has been a mayor as well, so he hasn't always been a protest politician in the same way that Jeremy Corbyn has. But also, and I think this is significant, Bernie Sanders is genuinely a class war social democrat. He hasn't, I don't know if he's ever described himself as that, but what he is arguing for as a presidential candidate is what he's been arguing for his whole career. Whereas it's undoubtedly the case that what Jeremy Corbyn was arguing for when he was a backbencher had to change when he became a frontbencher. So even though, on most of the big struggles in history, he's been on the right side, the Iraq War being, the big key example, apartheid, etc. His politics that he has espoused as a backbencher and as leader of the opposition, often there were some inconsistencies between them. Because the vision, what came naturally to Jeremy Corbyn wasn't, a fleshed out vision of social democracy that Bernie Sanders feels very comfortable, talking about.
So it's partly the party system is partly to explain then. The party system, he was a backbench MP for 35 years, very different.
Well, they come from different traditions, but also, I think the fact that
but can I just say, Sanders, I agree with you. Sanders had to be a propositional politician from, he was the mayor of Burlington. And Corbyn became a propositional politician, but probably not until about 2017. He came into his own as a propositional politician, whereas Sanders had been doing that for a couple of decades, I guess.
And the big structural difference, obviously, is that, this conversation would have been quite different if, by chance, it was John McDonnell that put himself forward for leader of the Labour Party, not
See, people
Jeremy
say that,
Corbyn.
but he lost twice.
Well, he lost twice in a different age when there was a different, rule for getting nominated. But I suppose the point is that many of these things we're talking about, in terms of the history, John McDonnell could quite easily have been also painted as, having sided with Britain's enemies in terms of the IRA, etc.
Look, when he was the Chancellor, the first thing he did was put Mao's Red Book in the House of Commons. Everybody's like, what the hell is this?
He is good at giving a convincing argument which makes him sound on the side of the audience and not sort of shifty and, like there's a division between him and the people watching.
But do you think he lost that in the final year? That's the thing, because it's like, Corbyn wasn't Sanders, but neither was McDonnell, because Sanders never would have done, if he'd done that GQ interview with Alistair Campbell, it would not have been the same interview that McDonnell did. So McDonnell seems to have like two, he's kind of like, he has two settings. It's either like very assertive, intellectual, old school socialist, or it's like, give me a belly rub.
I suppose
somebody who's a lifelong enemy.
There's two questions, isn't there? There's skill in an interview, and Bernie Sanders has it. John McDonnell has it. Corbyn, it was never particularly his strong point. And then there's political judgment. Bernie Sanders, up to now, has seemed to have always been excellent. There are a few issues, as we've talked about on the show, where McDonnell seems to have erred slightly. But also, John McDonnell was under very different pressures to Bernie Sanders at this point in time because of the different systems. It is hard to run the Labour Party as a populist candidate because you have to be leader of a parliamentary party, whereas Bernie Sanders is running as an individual for president. If there's a bunch of wankers in his party, he doesn't actually have to take them with him. It's very easy for him to pitch himself against the Democratic establishment because he's not relying on the Democratic establishment to, make his position as a candidate to be president viable in the same way that Jeremy Corbyn was reliant on the PLP to do the same for him.
Yeah, good structural analysis. You're watching Novara Media. This is Tisky Sam. My name's Jeremy Bastani. This is the one and only, the immarketable Michael Walker, at Michael J.S. Walker. We've got 1,207 people watching right now, but we've only got 196 thumbs up. Doesn't cost you anything. Click the thumbs up button. Like the show. After you've clicked the thumbs up, hit subscribe. Then after you've hit subscribe, go to the bell icon. Everybody's talking about bells, especially Big Ben. We don't want to talk about that tonight. We're not going to talk about it because it's a stupid talking point. But click the bell button. And then after you've done all of that, and that's all free, go to support.novaramedia.com if you like what you're watching, if you think we're providing something of interest, something that's informing you. Why not consider giving us a one-off donation, or even better, make a subscription to us. We generally propose 1 hour's work a month. So if you're on £15 an hour, maybe consider giving us £15 a month, maybe less. It's just something we like to propose, I guess. If you're earning less than living wage, please don't bother. Just hit the thumbs up button. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, probably TikTok soon, I guess. We should probably do something with TikTok.
Yeah, I haven't seen. Yeah, no, I'm into TikTok. I mean, I only see TikTok videos on Twitter, but the ones that make it to Twitter, I mean, it's a cool format.
But it's huge as well.
Yeah. I mean, I can't. It's exactly the same as Vine, right? But
yeah.
I'm sure there's some sort of difference.
It was the most downloaded social media app of 2019, I think, globally. So it's a thing.
Novara, the empire builders of Novara Media will be, moving on to this new platform. It'll be an aim for 2020. Eh?
We'll get first mover advantage with TikTok before, but probably Guido's on there, to be honest. We've got first mover advantage with a few things. I think we're doing pretty well we're doing better on YouTube than most of the sort of the media out there. People like Guido, terrible. Guido Fawkes, Paul Staines, terrible human being. Please don't tell him that on Twitter, perchance, at Guido Fawkes. Right, so we've talked about Sarners, we've talked about Corbyn. You also wanted to talk about how Sarners is, and I sort of hinted at this earlier on, being the most electable candidate. And this was fascinating. I don't know if we have got a graphic of it, I don't know.
We probably don't have it. I mean, it's from a Matt Iglesias. This is the one from the Matt Iglesias
article,
right?
This is really intriguing.
And Matt Iglesias is not a leftist, but he did an article for Vox saying that Sanders is the most electable candidate, and he was looking at the history of or comparisons between how many, the vote share that Sanders got in Vermont versus the vote share that the Democratic presidential candidate got in Vermont, at the same time. So who outperforms who? And in every year that Sanders has been up for election in the same year as a Democratic presidential candidate, he has, in many cases, wildly outperformed the presidential candidate. Others closer. So we might be able to get this up. In 1992, Sanders got 58% to Bill Clinton's 46%. In 96, Sanders got 55 to Clinton's 53, not that much difference. In 2000, Sanders got 69% to Al Gore's 51%, so huge difference there. 2004, Sanders got 67% to John Kerry's 59%, and in 2012, Sanders got 71% to Obama's 67%. So he is outperforming, centrist Democratic presidential candidates in all of those years. Obviously, he didn't stand. We don't have the comparison with Hillary Clinton because he's a senator. They're up for election every 6 years, so he wasn't standing in 2016. But it looks like he is the electable candidate, even by the traditional standards of that term.
He's an effective politician, rhetorically.
You could say that.
Electorally. What prompted this discussion tonight was, of course, the debate, which we're sort of yet to really look at in great detail. There is a great clip, which we're going to play now, from Crystal Ball, friend of the show, on Hill TV. And she kind of takes a very critical position of how Liz Warren is playing things. The big talking point of last night, which is Liz Warren refusing to shake the hand of Bernie Sanders after the debate had finished. So we're going to go to that.
But the really nasty, revealing part of the night came afterwards. Now remember, Elizabeth Warren has claimed for a long time that Bernie Sanders is a close friend and ally. But now that things are coming down to the wire, she decided to level this ugly, vicious identity politics attack on him for her own political game. It's desperate and it's obvious exactly what she's doing. So who's the wronged party here? And yet, after the debate concludes, when Senator Sanders goes to try to do the classy thing and shake her hand, what does she do? She won't even shake his hand. Instead, continuing to lecture him about her perceived slights and perceived wrongs. It's absolutely classless and it's outrageous. But meanwhile, of course, the media, they eat it up. Why? Well, first of all, this was CNN's quote-unquote reporting, which was really he said, she said. There are two people in the room. One person said it happened. One person says it's a lie. That's not a report. That's a dispute.
I love how she says that's not a news story. It's a dispute, which is so true. He said, she said. Anyway, it does provide the media, it does give them something frivolous and stupid to talk about rather than the actual issues at hand, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if that video didn't give, the background to the whole situation, what happened is that Elizabeth Warren or her team briefed a couple of days ago, just before the debate, so it's clearly going to come up, that Bernie Sanders had told her in 2018, that a woman could not win the presidency. And I mean, the story's quite interesting. It was let's get the quote from CNN who ran the story. So basically, they met in 2008, December 2018, in Warren's flat to discuss how the primaries were going to go, how they should relate to one another, and they also had a discussion about who would be best placed to beat Donald Trump in 2020. And this is from CNN. The two agreed that if they ultimately faced each other as presidential candidates, they should remain civil and avoid attacking one another so as not to hurt the progressive movement. They also discussed how best to take on President Donald Trump. And Warren laid out two main reasons she believed she would be a strong candidate. She could make a robust argument about the economy and earn broad support from female voters. Sanders responded that he did not believe a woman could win. So that was briefed from Warren's team. Afterwards, Warren confirmed that, or said that was her account of what happened. Sanders denied that's what's happened. I suppose for a little more background, they haven't really been attacking each other throughout this campaign up until 2 days before this CNN story about Sanders talking about the electability of women came out. It came out that there was a script that Sanders' team were giving some of his activists when calling up people trying to get out the vote for Bernie Sanders. And they said of Elizabeth Warren, we might be able to get this up as well. This was in a script to phone bankers. I like Elizabeth Warren. In fact, she's my second choice. But here's my concern about her. The people who support her are highly educated, more affluent people who are going to show up and vote Democrat no matter what. She's bringing no new bases into the Democratic Party. We need to turn out disaffected working class voters if we're going to beat Trump.
Good analysis.
I mean, it's also, that's super vanilla. That's not that's not personal, is it? That's saying we've looked at the polls.
Yeah.
I mean, I was listening to a 538 podcast on the way here, which is not, they're not a bunch of, Bernie lovers. And they were like, yeah, I mean, that's just...
It's a good it's a sociological analysis.
That's just sociological analysis of what the polls are telling you. So it wasn't a big deal. I mean, obviously, one thing Crystal Ball is right about it was he said, she said. We don't know what was said there. I think what Bernie Sanders has said is his memory of the meeting was that Donald Trump will weaponize anything they can against their opponent, be that race, racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever. He was saying Donald Trump will play dirty. Obviously, we don't know what happened.
Well, there was one of Trump's press spokespeople said that what this proves is that if you ever have a meeting with Liz Warren, you need to take a third party in there to observe and be a witness.
Is that what one of Sanders' press people said?
Trump's people.
Okay, that
makes sense.
Throwing cat amongst pigeons there.
Yeah, but it's like, look, there's no independent way of verifying this. I mean, if it doesn't stand up in a court of law, you can't expect it to land politically.
Should we look at Sanders' response? It's just another example of him dealing with controversy quite well. Can we get this up, Fox?
CNN reported yesterday that, and Senator Warren confirmed in a statement, that in 2018, you told her that you did not believe that a woman could win the election. Why did you say that?
Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't say it. And I don't want to waste a whole lot of time on this because this is what Donald Trump and maybe some of the media want. Anybody knows me, knows that it's incomprehensible that I would think that a woman could not be president of the United States. Go to YouTube today. There's some video of me 30 years ago talking about how a woman could become president of the United States. In 2015, I deferred, in fact, to Senator Warren. There was a movement to draft Senator Warren to run for president. And you know what? I stayed back. Senator Warren decided not to run, and I did run afterwards. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million votes. How could anybody in a million years not believe that a woman could become president of the United States? And let me be very clear. If any of the women on this stage or any of the men on this stage win the nomination, I hope that's not the case. I hope it's me. But if they do, I will do everything in my power to make sure that they are elected in order to defeat the most dangerous president in the history of our country.
So, Senator Sanders.
So I mean, another clip which shows I suppose, my original 2 points, which is Bernie Sanders has always got a history which he can be proud of. There don't seem to be that many embarrassing moments from it. He's like, watch the YouTube video from 1975. and it's never like, and you might see me saying that the hand of Israel is behind some, that's one of the more embarrassing ones from Corbyn. If you videos of Corbyn often came up that caused him difficulties. It doesn't seem like videos come up with Sanders that do. He was imprecise with his language. And Bernie Sanders is often quite precise with his language. And, I mean, again, he brought it back to what matters. He moved it away from the he said, she said, and said, this is my record, this is what I believe, take it or leave it.
And also 2016, in terms of the Democrat nomination, Sanders wasn't going to run as long as Warren was running. Warren chose not to run because Clinton was running, and then Sanders said, well, so we need a progressive candidate, we need a left candidate to run. He didn't think he was going to win. Ultimately, he didn't win, but he didn't think he was going to do as well as he ultimately did either. It doesn't really stand up, that theory of him thinking a woman can't be the president.
At the same time, probably those two candidates, and I hope the people at the top of their teams will try and deflate this whole debate, because I think if when we're going into such a key moment in the Democratic primaries, you end up with a big he said, she said debate about sexism. I don't think that's going to be good for Sanders or for Warren. I think that's only going to be good for their opponents. It's off script, isn't it?
If you can't prove it, there's just there's no point. So that's enough about US politics. We've had a big story breaking shortly before we came on air this evening. Labour List and Survation did a poll of Labour List readers. It's weighted to make it more representative as a sample. Of course, we can have a conversation about methodology. But the bottom line is the race is very competitive. That had on the first round of voting for the candidates for Labour leader, Rebecca Long-Bailey 42%, Keir Starmer 37%, Jess Phillips 9%, Lisa Nandy 7%, and Emily Thornberry on just 1%, rather embarrassing for Emily Thornberry. But then, of course, the sample may not be particularly big. And then on second preferences, Rebecca Long-Bailey just takes it, 51-49. Now, that could be way off in terms of the sample. It could be 20% off. But the bottom line is, even if it's 60-40 Starmer, this is quite competitive. I think more than most of our audience, I think most pundits presumed. What's your feeling around those findings this evening?
I mean, I was surprised because I think up to this point, Starmer's had a better campaign. He launched earlier. He had a very impressive, first video which sort of pushed his past and showed that he's got an impressive background of activism, etc. But I think he also has, politically at least, I think in terms of talking about his background, it's been a strong campaign. In terms of what is his political vision, it's been fairly weak. And what has changed, or I mean, potentially this is just a different methodology from YouGov. And so whilst YouGov gave Keir Starmer a stomping majority in this as Rebecca Long-Bailey winning, it could be the case that there's a different methodology and that's why. But also just as likely and just as plausible is that the YouGov poll was done at the end of December. At that point in time, Labour members didn't really know who the candidates were. They knew that Keir Starmer was loyal, looked like a prime minister, had been quite a decent frontbencher. Rebecca Long-Bailey had, worse name recognition. But also it wasn't clear at that point who was the left candidate. And since December, as the election has sort of hotted up and is getting more media coverage, Becky Long-Bailey has been attacked as the Corbyn continuity candidate. And I think what might become apparent is actually, to most members, that just means, Becky Long-Bailey is the left candidate. And they think, well, Becky Long-Bailey is the left candidate, I'm going to vote for Becky Long-Bailey. And I mean, I think that blows the race wide open. And at the moment, I do think Keir Starmer has taken, the left flank for granted, probably because of, he saw himself so far ahead in that YouGov poll and thought, they're going to vote for me because they're terrified of having another Corbynite because they're terrified of losing again. Obviously, Becky Long-Bailey will have to challenge that particular narrative that Corbynites always lose. I hope she'll be successful at it. Just for the sake of having a good competitive race. But yeah, absolutely all to play for.
Somebody's put here in the comments, presumably Labour List readers are a bit further to the left than the membership on average. I mean, I wouldn't be so sure because I would have thought the average Labour List reader would be more prone to backing Lisa Nandy, Emily Thornberry. It's a really strange one. It could be off, but I think you probably just take a poll of polls between that, like you say, and the YouGov one, put them two together, and it's pretty close.
I don't know how many more polls YouGov are planning in the race. I mean, it'd be super interesting.
I've had enough of polls. I don't know about you, but we know it's competitive, and we know that Jess Phillips on 9%. That's appalling.
Competitive, but only between two candidates, basically.
Right. 9% for Jess Phillips. I mean, this was meant to be the right-wing candidate. A lot of people who would
So much money went on that launch video.
Oh my God! Who would have gone in behind her? They've gone in behind Starmer, right? Which tells you obviously something about the political complexion of the Starmer campaign. But still, you know, she's got Wes Streeting and Melanie working on her team, and she's on 9%. And I happen to think that would probably go lower. I think Lisa Nandy will pick up some of her votes over time. I think Keir Starmer will as well. But yes, interesting. Let's talk a bit more about Keir Starmer. We're going to cut to this video from an event he did, was it Saturday in Manchester?
Yeah, it was his launch event on Saturday.
His launch event, that's right. It was his launch event. Time flies.
So it's important to also note that Becky Long-Bailey hasn't had her official launch yet. So these polls are all happening before, you know, all the candidates have properly, well, she's announced, but have properly.
I mean, she announced 3 weeks after Starmer. You know, her site only launched yesterday. You know, Starmer's site launched basically, you know, around Christmas time. So let's go to that. Keir Starmer saying his launch event that factionalism must go.
We cannot fight the Tories if we're fighting each other. Factionalism has to go. It has to go. We have... The question should not be, which side are you on? It should be, what are you saying? We have huge talent and passion and dedication and commitment in our Labour Party and our Labour movement. We need to draw on that. Draw it together as a united force for good and a united force for change.
What did you make of that? What did you make of the sort of the presentation he was giving just generally?
Yeah, I mean, I watched the whole Q&As and I thought the whole Q&As were fairly strong. You know, he could give, you know, adept answers to most of the questions. I mean, he's not an electrifying performer. And so, I mean, I think all will be to play for in the debates, which start this Saturday, in fact. So we'll be doing a lot of, you know, a big rundown of those on the Monday show. Yeah, doesn't blow you away, does it? In terms of what he's saying, we need to end factionalism. That all depends on how you interpret it. And I mean, he needs to be pushed on what that means in practice. Because if you're saying we need to find a way to stop, you know, civil war in the Labour Party taking up quite so much time and having, you know, quite so many people on the airwaves trashing the party in public, absolutely. Everyone will want that. But it depends on how you make that happen. So the easiest way for Keir Starmer to stop factionalism or to stop, you know, vicious civil wars in the public eye, which, you know, obviously have been dragging down Labour in the polls, etc. They've been incredibly distracting as well, would be for him to shut out the left. Because as the nomination process has shown, the left within the PLP is still very small. So I think there was only about 37 MPs in total nominated Clive Lewis and Rebecca Long-Bailey out of, how many do we have? 208 MPs, I think. In
a bit more, I think, now.
Something 211? Like 210, 211, something along those lines. About less than 1/5 of MPs are, you know, properly of the left. So if Keir Starmer were to say that, you know, people with left as momentum, yeah, obviously don't purge them because that would, you know, create a bit of a drama, but exclude them from influence and exclude them from systems of power, potentially change, you know, the mode by which you elect a leader or by which you select MPs to shut out, you know, lefties from, well, left-wingers from traditions of political influence. That would be super easy for him to stop the civil war. Because
would it though? Because you'd still have people no confidencing MPs, like has been happening over the last several years. You'd have people like yourself and I were not particularly prominent in the mainstream media, but we would have some presence attacking them, criticising them for that.
We'd have some presence, but, and here's the thing, like, why it was so damaging why the civil wars were made so damaging for the Labour Party over the last 4 years is because any time Jess Phillips or Chuka Umunna wanted to go on the Today programme, or Tom Watson for that matter, wanted to go on the Today programme and say the Labour Party's a mess, the leadership's crap, the whole thing's a joke, they were welcomed. If Becky Long-Bailey now has if Keir Starmer wins, and I'm not saying this is what he's going to do, I'm just saying this is hypothetical. If Keir Starmer wins and he decides to change the rules for selecting an MP or changes the rules for how many members get to sit on the NEC, etc., etc., do you think the Today programme are really going to have a chair ready for Rebecca Long-Bailey to say that Keir Starmer is clamping down on democracy because there are now less CLP positions on the NEC? No, that's not good television.
They're already on manoeuvres for this, right? So he's talked about, he sent a mail shot out to
more councillors, right?
Councillors,
so if you increase the power of councillors, then you increase the power of the right in the party.
Tweeting. He retweeted somebody who said, you want to, or this person wants to diminish the power of members by increasing the number of representatives. So right now, councillors on the Labour NEC, the executive body of the Labour Party, they have 2 representatives. Somebody said, you want to move power away from members and 2 councillors? And he said, absolutely right, I do. And then I replied to him saying, so you want members to have, the average member to have less power? He said, no, how could you possibly say that? And I just tweeted that saying, yes, I do. But that would be one way of very quickly diminishing the power of the membership at large and empowering a smaller minority.
And he'd have the answer which the media would love, and they wouldn't bother. He just wouldn't get interrogated on it, because he'd say, look, the Labour Party have to stop concerning themselves with internal rule changes, and people need to stop challenging sitting MPs, because we've got, how many seats do we have to win for a majority? 80 seats to win a majority, or however many it is.
You probably need to win 40 seats off the Tories to have a chance of forming a government.
We need 40 seats for the Tories to be the last. Yeah, exactly. Well, you need 41 seats to get rid of the Conservative majority. Yeah. Well, we should have looked up how many precisely it is for the Labour Party to get a majority. He'd easily just say, that's our priority. And to be honest, the interviewers, they're not from the left. They'll be like, oh yeah, fine, reasonable. So him shutting out the left would be remarkably easy. There is another... I think it would be electorally catastrophic, because he'd be going down exactly the same route that Ed Miliband went down, Gordon Brown, Neil Kinnock, which is when you run from the soft left, if you cut off your base, if you cut off the radical potential for your party, then you have no counterattack when the Sun will find so many reasons to destroy Keir Starmer, and unless he can show himself as a leader of an oppositional and popular movement, then he'll get destroyed. But so maybe he's smart enough to go for a different means to getting rid of factionalism, which would be to restructure the party so that when competition happens, it happens in a healthy way. It would happen in a healthy way by things like open selections. You wouldn't be doing votes of no confidence in your MP. You'd be building up a candidate who might be able to stand against them. So,
do you think he's open to the idea of open selection or primaries?
I've actually got an article coming out of Novara tomorrow, which says that, we know that he organises in his CLP with the right. We also know that he's, hired people. You mentioned this in your article for Huck as well. Hired people from Labour First, etc., who are, factional fighters. At the same time, when Labour List asked him about open selections, he said, "Well, to be honest, I do think we need a way to refresh the PLP a bit and for new people to come up." And I think he once proposed in a CLP that there'd be 10-year term limits. So I think he might have more of a meritocratic approach to it, which is that sort of like, he managed a big organisation. If someone's not particularly good at their job, there should be a means to get rid of them.
That's the thing.
But you can give a technocratic or a non-partisan defence of open selections, which I think he should do.
He reached the top of his game. He was the director of public prosecutions. He was, he was a QC. He's an incredibly formidable person in his profession. I mean, it's very hard to think that somebody like that would at the same time think, yes, these MPs, many of whom who may like him, may endorse him, he may not think are particularly talented. That does happen when you have, 200 colleagues. You're going to not rate some people. It'd be perfectly coherent for him to say, I don't think these people should have jobs for life.
Yeah. I mean, the worry would be, is that a battle? He gets into that position. Is that a battle he wants to fight anymore? And I think what someone like Ed Miliband decided in every situation was, is that a battle I want to fight? Do I want to fight the centre and the right of this party? No. Do I want to fight the PLP? No. And what did it mean? It meant that he ended up with an incredibly bland, nothingness position, which tanked.
Lose 800,000 votes to the Greens, lose 4 million votes to UKIP, lose Scotland. I mean, people, that's what happened last time the soft left was in charge of the party. Yes, he got more seats than Corbyn, but, it was 700,000 fewer votes. And with the media nowhere near as harsh as they were with Corbyn. We're going to take questions in a second. We're going to take questions in 1 second. Before we do, so put those in the comments with the rocket emoji. Also, go to Twitter, #TiskiSour. We've got around 1,268 people watching. If you can share this show on Twitter with the hashtag, much appreciated. Hit the thumbs up button, even more appreciated. Get those questions in. Lisa Nandy says she supports freedom of movement. This is meant to be the Blue Labour candidate. What's going on?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I think she's obviously read the mood of the membership, and she is saying, because there was a lot of, people were labelling her as the Blue Labour candidate. I think there was a guy, Ian Warren, who is doing data for her campaign, who's also, I should have looked up this story properly. Did he do data for Leave Means Leave?
Leave.eu.
Leave.eu.
Which is the Aaron Banks vehicle.
And many of the people who are supporting her, who nominated her, are the kind of MPs who tend to want a more restrictive approach to migration, people like Stephen Kinnock. And she's spoken at Blue Labour events, etc. But I think she obviously saw that was the way that she was being typecast by her opponents, and she thought that was going to be a huge barrier to her having any breakthrough in this race. So to counteract that, she's done a speech saying that she thinks, well, it's in the past tense, isn't it? And it's always interesting when something's in the past tense, when I don't remember her ever saying that, at the time, that Labour should be doing a defence of freedom movement. It's worth reading the quote in full. So she said today to an event at the RSA, "We should have been bold enough to defend free movement and the opportunities and benefits it brings, but this would have required recognising it has flaws and not dismissing concerns as simply racist anti-immigrant sentiment. We should acknowledge that over decades governments have used the steady influx of skilled labour to cover up a lack of investment in skills and training in the UK and address this. I believe in free movement if it were paired with renewed and radical investment that enabled opportunities for young people, decent jobs, training and skills, and then the same concerns would have fallen away." So again, it's sort of in the past tense. It's not necessarily committing the Labour Party to defend freedom of movement, but she's saying she thinks we should have defended it more, which is kind of easy to say. I mean, it's also interesting that her language there is very similar to someone like Len McCluskey, who says, I support freedom of movement, but so long as it comes with investment, et cetera, et cetera. So there'd be people on the left who'd critique that because they say, why is your support for it conditional?
So Lisa Nandy's to the left of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders would say freedom of movement is a Koch brothers proposal.
Well, he'd say open borders are a Koch brothers proposal. She's talking about free movement in the European Union, right?
Well,
and they're very different. Free movement in the European Union is between middle-income countries. You're not going to have the same.
Well, not entirely true, but yeah. You've got Bulgaria, Romania with GDP per capita of around $10,000, and then you've got Sweden or Ireland with like $70,000. But yeah,
I think she'd probably agree with that Bernie Sanders video.
I think she would. Yeah, it's kind of. Do you think we'll be hearing a lot more of this, of basically people like Starmer or like Nandy saying things that the membership wants to hear?
Well, I think they should be saying this kind. Well, I mean, my position on this has always been that the obsession with free movement as it currently exists in the EU is a little bit arbitrary, in the sense that I think that a red line for the Labour Party should always be you don't scapegoat migrants, you don't try and increase the salience of migration, you don't put controls on immigration on mugs. That's like stupid and also deeply irresponsible because it's reinforcing negative attitudes about migration. Would it have been acceptable, and will it be acceptable in the future for the Labour Party to say, look, we need a migration system that's based on consent, people voted Brexit, freedom of movement has now ended, we need to look at how we can have a migration system which respects human rights? And so for me, that would be something like saying, look, Germany accepted 1 million Syrians. These were people fleeing civil war. Britain accepted, 10,000. I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but, appalling, disgraceful dereliction of duty on our part. And that we should phrase this discussion not as, I think, how the discussion with freedom movement often takes place, which is that there is no alternative. This is the policy. If you want to change it, you're racist, and you can't change it anyway because this is just reality. I think you can say, look, we as a society can construct. It's within our power to construct an immigration system for which there is consent, and what we're going to argue for is for that to put front and center respecting human rights. And I don't necessarily think that that could include free movement with the European Union. I don't think it necessarily has to. So I think that's why it can be, I think it's a policy choice, not a moral red line. The moral red line is much more important. Are you generous with granting asylum?
I totally agree. I think Britain in recent years has been accepting around 35,000 asylum applications a year. A couple of years ago, Sweden was, I think, 90,000. Sweden has a population, we're 65 million. I think Sweden's around 10 million. So
and then you get to move on from the conversation about wages, etc., because you say, no, this is about how welcoming. This isn't about a technocratic debate where you're not allowed to talk about, cultural issues because it's saying, no, look, we welcome people who need a home here. And it's saying, but these policy questions, then obviously they're up for democratic debate.
Yeah, separate the two issues. Right, let's get to these questions. Get them in. Now, we'll keep on taking them on that hashtag as well, Twitter. Tisky Sour, this is from Joseph O, asks, how do Labour attack the Tories if the economy doesn't tank after Brexit? I guess that's a pretty big if, but if all the prognostications about...
So what was the question
Joseph O, how do Labour attack the Tories if the economy doesn't tank after Brexit? let's say Brexit isn't a complete disaster. Let's say, I mean, already it looks like we're in recession for the final, well, not in recession. It looks like the final quarter of last year, we have negative growth. But let's say things are quite bland, 1% annual growth. How do Labour attack the Tories?
I mean, I think even if the economy doesn't tank, there will be plenty of opportunities to attack the Tories. So just today, I mean, obviously it depends what happens over the coming years. But even today, Matt Hancock, after a whole campaign which was saying the Tories are the party of the NHS, has abandoned targets for waiting times in hospitals. So at the moment, it's counted against a hospital if people have to wait for more than 4 hours in A&E. He's saying instead of, I think the Tories have failed this for the last 4 years or so. It was consistently met under New Labour, whatever their faults. It was consistently missed under the Conservatives, a very easy attack line against the Tories. And instead of saying, OK, look, we fucked up, we'll rectify this mistake, they've got rid of the target. It was similar to what they tried to do with child poverty beforehand. So in terms of dereliction of duty when it comes to the NHS, and especially, I mean, I think something that will be apparent with this Conservative government is whilst sort of led by polls, they might try and raise the living standards of the median person in a red wall seat, someone on a median income in a red wall seat, because they see them as a swing voter. I don't see any reason why they're going to try and, facilitate a happy life for more marginalised communities in this society, because I don't think they see them as part of their big popular constituency.
There's an argument that says that Johnson will reverse austerity, particularly in the seats you just said, sort of red wall seats, towns in the Midlands, north, west, north.
And he'll do them for popular programmes,
do you
not for things like unemployment
benefits. Do you think he will, though? I mean, NHS, I think will happen. I think he'll probably just basically kind of bump up funding for the NHS in the context of the disaster that's been the last 10 years. That's amazing. But other than that, because you still have Sajid Javid, who's the Chancellor, who's a neoliberal, right? You do have this populist right-wing element, people like Dominic Cummings, who are like, look, if we do this, this and this, it's tested, we'll have a majority of 120. Boris Johnson just wants to be popular. He would have been a Blairite in the late 90s. But there is still that big part of the Conservative Party, which is neoliberals.
Well, neoliberal hasn't always meant fiscally tight, right? So if you look at the Republicans in the United States, they're neoliberals in the sense that what they want is to cut rules and regulations. What they want is to cut taxes. Sure, but what they do is they're happy to do loads and loads of deficit spending to pepper money where it helps them.
They can run a permanent deficit because they're the world's...
Yeah, but they can. But I mean, Britain, the pound is pretty goddamn strong. And the argument that George Osborne gave for austerity, which was that if we don't, balance our budgets, then no one is going to lend Britain money. We're always... shit that was always based on a lie. So I don't see why you can't be a fiscally profligate neoliberal, which I think is probably what the Conservatives are going to do.
So you think people like Sajid Javid will go down that route? You don't think Sajid Javid, he's talked about running surpluses and still, you think that's all going to go out the window?
Yeah. And the reason you can do that is because, I mean, when the left do that, you say, investors get a bit worried because they think that this is a government who's spending a lot and potentially doesn't have its heart in defending capitalism. Whereas, capitalists don't really mind deficit spending as long as they trust the government to look after their interests. And this government is going to look after their goddamn interests, right? So I think they probably will pepper money around. I mean, the argument, James Meadway was on here the other day talking about, how you can attack or what your critique will be of a Conservative Party, which is happy to pepper money around in a way that Cameron and May weren't, is you talk about power. So this will all be done from Westminster. They're not going to be willing to empower any local institutions in case those local institutions are run by Labour and they want to take all of the credit. So there will be opportunities there to talk about the danger of centralised power. And also, centralised power will probably bring with it a lot of fuck-ups and a lot of wasted money, just like the Garden Bridge when Johnson was Mayor of London.
So I'm going to ask another question from Joseph Orbit. It's a great question. Be quick, because we're going to get through a few and we're going to wrap up in 5 minutes. Question. Sanders benefits from his independent status, but won't a Democratic presidency create new problems here since he'll rely on a Democratic Senate? Which is to say, to get legislation through, we've talked about how the system over there is rather different. He doesn't have to worry about a parliamentary party with different politics to his, like Corbyn did. But if he was president and he had this big leftist agenda, could he actually rely on, even if he had a congressional majority, which he doesn't, if it was establishment Democrats, would they want to get any of his legislation through? And how could he push back against that?
Well, how could it? So it would create challenges that you wouldn't have here. But also, one thing you are secure as is the president. I mean, they could try and impeach him, but the thing with if Jeremy Corbyn became prime minister with potentially not a big majority, then his backbenchers can literally bring him down. They can stop him being prime minister. Whereas at least in Congress, they don't have that particular power. I think it'd be very difficult for him to radically transform the economy of the United States. Medicare for all, for example, will be incredibly difficult to pass. Obamacare, one of the reasons that was so crappy, and didn't remove any power from the insurance industry was because of a couple of recalcitrant Democratic Congress people. And if that was the level of opposition Obama faced, Bernie's will be much greater. I mean, the way, I presume, his plan to get around that would be similar to Donald Trump's, which is to say, I am now the Democratic Party is now, a Bernie-crat party. This is what people want to see. They voted for my agenda. That's what they want to see pushed through. And if you try and block that, then you're going to get primaried. Yeah, which is basically what Donald Trump has said. If you challenge my agenda, which I have, a mandate for, you'll get primaried.
I think a lot of politicians just want to be popular and they just want to be re-elected. And I think if you can demonstrate that, they'll get on board.
Although there'll be a lot of people who won't worry about getting primaried because they can just go and, there'll be the insurance lobby, the medical insurance lobbyists will be offering people huge golden goodbyes to say, like, look, if you get primaried, we'll give you £1 million a year job, and it'll be worth their money to do that.
Yeah. Yay for Andy says, let's keep these questions nice and quick. Yay for Andy. What do we do if Sir Keir wins? Sick emoji. What does he mean by the Labour left, I guess? What should we do?
Try and shift him to the left. Try and defend those, or try and get open selections in place and make non-factional arguments for it, and try and keep him to the left by demanding that there are good lefties in the shadow cabinet. And I mean, if you look at it in terms of what was, the original plan to get Corbyn on the ballot, when they didn't think he was going to win, it was to have a huge energised left and a powerful base within Parliament. Both of those exist. So I think there'll be lots of opportunity to make him better than Ed Miliband was.
Yeah. I think that's a fair answer. What would a successful local election result be for Labour right now? Bear in mind we have local elections in May. What would a successful local election result look like?
I've got no idea, actually. I haven't really been paying much attention to the local elections. What would a successful one look like?
I think Labour should be looking to do well. I
don't even know where the I mean, there's the London mayoral campaign.
Because the Lib Dem vote presumably is now going to collapse. Presumably. I mean, it did very well.
It depends where they are, doesn't it?
But I'm saying
is it in red wall seats, these local elections, or is it all in London?
But last year, the local elections were in May, which is the same month as the European elections. So the Lib Dems did really well, right? So there's I think Labour should look to do relatively well, given that the Lib Dem vote should collapse. Final question. Actually, let's take two more. Alistair Francis says, what in the next few years can Labour members do at a grassroots activism level to regrow a sense of community and solidarity? You don't like that word grassroots, do you?
I'm all in favour of it. My problem with the use of grassroots organising is as a silver bullet, is as a way to avoid difficult questions. If you say, look, the Labour Party can have exactly the same platform and message it in the same way, but what we need to do is talk to more people. I think, obviously, that talking to more people and organising is absolutely necessary. It's not going to be a silver bullet. But how to do it in practice, it's difficult, That's why you have professional community organisers in the Labour Party, because, any Tom, Dick and Harry going up to an estate and saying, what do you want to organise about? I mean, it's a difficult thing to do.
It's a technical thing. It's a technical endeavour, and technical endeavour requires training, professionalism, data collection, time, resource management. And I agree with the silver bullet thing. I think it's irritating. The future of politics is small, it's local, it's grassroots, it's all these nebulous things you can't really actually explain. Okay, let's take two more. Joseph O, the third question Joseph O's asked. Sorry, guys. This is a great question. I want Michael to answer it for me. Why should leftists campaign for Sadiq Khan as London Mayor?
Well, so my argument there would be that I think the left has most influence as sort of active participants in the Labour Party at this point in time. We live in a two-party system. I do think that if you want to push the political agenda to the left, then the most useful route to do that is via the Labour Party. I do think it makes sense for people as Labour activists to have commitment to the party. It means, you will ultimately have more influence within it. Sadiq Khan is better than Sean Bailey.
Some people would say it's just the same, right?
No, Sadiq Khan is not the same as Sean Bailey. I mean, if you...
No, I don't think that. I mean, part of the answer there is that basically the London mayor doesn't have much power anyway. I don't buy that answer because Ken Livingstone did so much with it and Boris Johnson did sweet FA.
If someone was thinking of voting for the Green candidate 1 and Sadiq Khan 2, I'm not going to have a row with them about it. Like, fine, whatever.
I mean, my answer would be we want to have Sadiq Khan re-elected, and in 4 years' time, I want a left-wing socialist mayor of London. But I also want centrist members of the Labour Party, because it's a coalition, because we have first past the post as a system, we have to be in the same party. I would say to them, you have to get behind our left candidate, and I think it helps the argument if you've gotten behind a candidate who, you know, wasn't necessarily reflecting your politics. You see it time after time. Jeremy Gilbert would say, well, look, for 20 years, I've gone and helped leaders who I didn't really agree with, and I campaigned for them to be Prime Minister of this country. You could do the least and sort of reciprocate that and help Jeremy Corbyn. Final question. Any tactics worth... And by the way, just for the record, I do think Sadiq Khan would be a much better mayor than Sean Bailey. I was just trying to be provocative and say that, well, they're all the same. And obviously they're not. As we saw with Ken Livingstone and Boris Johnson. Ken Livingstone transformed London. Any tactics worth copying from UNE? Any tactics worth copying from the Bernie campaign that can help Labour in the future? 30 seconds.
Probably. I mean, in what respect? I mean, in terms of what can the next leader of the Labour Party learn from Bernie Sanders? Fuckloads. Message discipline, have a simple message, have some facts that people can remember because you repeat them constantly. There are 5, I've actually forgotten it now because I haven't watched it. There are 5 billionaires with the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50% of the majority of people in America, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of like the big organising that the campaigns do, a lot of that was brought over by momentum in the general election campaign.
Are we going to take one question from Twitter? Have we taken any questions from Twitter?
We should take...
Let's take one.
We should take one from Twitter just because we always tell people tweet on the hashtag.
Yeah, I'll get one from Twitter.
And then that will 100% be the last one.
Well, to be fair, we started 10 minutes late. So this is an hour and 10 show. Do you want to get a question from Twitter up, Michael? I've got a question here which I quite like.
On Twitter?
Yeah. From Money Cannot Be Eaten. Will Novara back any candidate at some point in the election process? I don't think so.
Not as an organisation.
Well, no, we've never done that. I think probably our personal preferences will be quite evident. I think I'm probably going to demur from backing anybody.
Yeah, I haven't decided whether I'm going to back anyone. But yeah, as an organisation, we won't. As individuals, you have to wait.
I think you have to just let the arguments stand for themselves. So yeah, bring up a question from the hashtag.
Is there any viable way of getting Rebecca Long-Bailey in power, not very educated on Labour Party internal politics, from Harris? Yes. I think her and Starmer have a 50-50 chance, or 50-50, 55-45. I mean, after today's polls, I think actually it is 50-50. So, yes.
I think it's 50-50.
Especially with the mobilising power of momentum behind her. Once it's clear that she is the Corbynite candidate and she's the movement candidate, I think that could create a hell of a lot of momentum.
I think so. If she has a good launch on Friday, things could move very quickly. Any others?
I can't see that, because I saw someone in the YouTube comments saying, like, when are you going to go to the ones on Twitter?
Maybe they're just atting you furiously.
Yeah. In any case, we still love you going on the will you do a video collaboration with, this is on Twitter, will you do a video collaboration with Michael Brooks, Crystal Ball, Anna Kasparian, representatives of the US left-wing correspondents that can provide interesting context to conversations about the US primaries? Yes.
Well, ahead of the presidential race in particular.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll do lots of
after Iowa, we're going to set up some really good interviews.
Yeah, lots of collaborations.
After the Iowa caucus.
Yeah, lots of collaborations. You've been wonderful. Thank you just now to Alistair Francis giving us £7. We're very grateful to answer your question, Alistair. Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
I'll be back Friday with hopefully Phil Miller. Got a new book out the Monday after that on the role of British mercenaries and war abroad. Very interesting stuff. And Michael, you'll be back next week.
I'll be back on Monday. I'm not sure who my guests are yet. I'll confirm them soon. But we'll be talking, I suppose, partly about the first Labour Party leadership debates.
Of course.
We'll see what the candidates have to put on the table.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a very significant moment.
It will be. We'll know a lot more about who's going to win, I think, after Monday, because you've got the launch of Rebecca Long-Bailey Friday and then that debate on the Monday. So I'll see you Friday. Michael will see you Monday. Take care.